Okay, so in this second recording, I want us to look at the following paragraph. Actually, it's the one directly after the one we've just looked at, and it's at the end of page 14 into page 15. And it's the first description of the setting. First time we properly look outside of the narrow confines of the Brooker's house and the people who live there, towards the place of Wigan itself and what we see from the train as Orwell leaves. And then a very striking and very powerful image that Orwell gives us, where he sees this young woman who's unblocking poking a stick up a waste pipe and unblocking a drain. And so there are a couple of questions, or three questions. In what way does the setting link with what we've seen so far with the Brookers? So how does the physical environment of Wigan fit in with what we've already seen of the interior? We've looked at interiors and we've looked at people, and now we start looking at setting. And then we have this image. Why is it important? It is important. Every commentator, every comment and analysis you read of the road to WIgan Pier picks up on this particular scene as being one of the most, if not the most important scene in the whole of the first section of the book. So why do you think that is? And then what do you think Orwell is communicating to us through this image, and why do you think it's so powerful? So if you just pause the recording, spend again sort of 10-15 minutes, really closely read that section, and then again I'll go through it and pick up on a few points what I would consider to be important. So if you just pause the recording now. Okay, so let's look at this first section and look at the physical environment that we're introduced to. I just read this first section through. The train bore me away through the monstrous scenery of slag heaps, chimneys, piled up scrap iron, foul canals, paths of cindery mud crisscrossed by the prints of clogs. This was March, but the weather had been horribly cold, and everywhere there were mounds of blackened snow. As we moved slowly through the outskirts of the town, we passed row after row of little grey slum houses running at right angles to the embankment. First thing you notice, well, one of the first things I noticed, is colour, or the lack of colour. You can see here, there's no colour in this first section. We're just getting these continually. These adjectives, which are all pretty well disgusting. These are very dark and very grim adjectives. You know, there's this repetition of things that are dark, monstrous, foul, horrible, blackened and grey. There is absolutely nothing redeeming at all about the description of the place. It is, you know, the blackness and the greyness. There's just no colour at all in this place. So that the place itself is very much a reflection of the lives that these people lead. That the depression of the place is mirrored in the physical environment itself, which there's nothing particularly unusual or surprising about that. It would be very surprising if Orwell was describing this rather beautiful place filled with these rather depressed, hopeless people. It's a depressed, hopeless place full of depressed, hopeless people. And then there's that repetition. We've seen the repetition in the lives, and it's fairly clear here that the repetitive lives link in with the repetitive environments, that one feeds into the other. These row after row of faceless grey houses linking to the day after day of a rather faceless grey life. And then we get this very powerful scene. Remember, he's on a train, and out of the train window he sees a young woman. At the back of one of the houses, a young woman was kneeling on the stones, poking a stick up the leaden waste pipe which ran from the sink inside, in which I suppose was blocked. I had time to see everything about her sacking apron, her clumsy clogs, her arms reddened by the cold. She looked up as the train passed, and I was almost near enough to catch her eye. She had a round, pale face, the usual exhausted face of the slum girl who is 25 and looks 40, thanks to miscarriages and drudgery, and it wore, for the second in which I saw it, the most desolate, hopeless expression I have ever seen. So, I think that is so key, because that is the symbol of the effect of industrialization on the poor, or on human beings, not just on the poor, on humanity. That what Orwell does is he boils it down, he synthesizes it. This is the synthesizing of everything that's wrong in one image. And I think that's why this is such a powerful book, because he doesn't just, and this is why I think the first book is more powerful than the second, because the second to me generalizes. He talks an awful lot about the middle class socialist, but I think in this first section, in the same way he does with and I do strongly recommend you read this, Down and Out in Paris and London, which was the book that came before The Road to Wigan Pier. He does exactly this. He picks on individuals and he describes them in such a way that they come to represent a whole class of people. And so this young woman is representative of everything that's wrong about industrialization. You know, we've got the miscarriages and the drudgery. So it's the trauma of miscarriage, and it's the boredom of drudgery. It's that combination, I suppose, of having some deeply traumatic things happen to you, but also the day-to-day boredom that we've already picked up on. She could have been 25, she looked 40. And there's this image here, the clumsy clogs, the arms reddened by the cold. It's a very, very sad image, and it's a difficult one to read, because, you know, for me when I read it, I imagine the same sort of woman, and it's interesting that he picks on the woman as being the one that's the most kind of damaged in society. It's this sad-faced, red-armed woman who's old before her time, which has come to symbolise the effect of the Industrial Revolution on the individual. And the fact that they look at each other, and it's almost as if something passes between them. Some understanding. It was a profoundly important moment in George Orwell's life. Lots of things happened to Orwell. You know, his time in the Burmese police force from the age of 19 to 22, even his childhood, everything about it was important. His time spent with the down and outs in Paris and then in London. But you know, a couple of years before or a year or two before he travelled up to Wigan. But I think this is one of the most significant things that happens to Orwell. He makes connection. He looks at this woman, and for the split second, something definitely passes between them. And then this final comment. This is moving towards from the specific, like he does this a lot. Have a look as you reread the book, the way in which George Orwell moves from specific moments to general comments. It can be when he can start to sound a bit pompous, but I don't think he says anything pompous here. I think what he says is quite profound. It struck me then that we are mistaken, and then there's the we look. Again, it's the middle classes, isn't it? It's the ruling classes. Remember, from the 19th century onwards, it was the middle classes were the ones that were calling the shots. The industrial, the people who owned the factories, the politicians, the lawyers, these were the people who were powerful. We move away in the 19th and certainly into the 20th century from it being the landowners and the gentry and the upper classes who are the ones who are in power, much more towards the control and the power being in the hands of the middle classes. It struck me then that we are mistaken when we say that it isn't the same for them as it would be for us, and that people bred in the slums can imagine nothing but the slums. For what I saw in her face was not the ignorant suffering of an animal, and this is the kind of the prevailing view here. What we get is the kind of the dominant view of the poor, of the working classes, through the eyes of the middle and upper classes. That they're somehow less than human. You know, that they're somehow able to take it because, you know, they know nothing different. But interestingly, what Orwell says here, she knew well enough what was happening to her, understood as well as I did how dreadful a destiny it was to be kneeling there in the bitter cold on the slimy stones of a slum backyard, poking a stick up a foul drainpipe. So she knows how awful her life is, and again, this is why this was such an important book. Remember, this came up in the 1930s, and by 1945 we had a welfare state. And this was one of the books, not the only book, but it was one of the texts which really formed a clear understanding that it was just so important that the state helped people like this woman, that we couldn't allow a civilized society. You know, we were, even in the 1930s, the empire was still very, very strong. It wasn't really till the later 1940s, post-war, that we started to really move away from being a colonial power. Mainly because we'd lost so much money in the war that we couldn't afford to do what we would expand the colonies. And also people started looking, you know, fairly critically, I think, at our role as this kind of world power. So, you know, this world of deep poverty and deep drudgery that we had to do something about. And this was one of the books which brought that about. So this key passage here, where we move from the specific instance of the woman and the poverty of the woman's life towards, or well, I suppose, challenging. I think this is a challenge, this section here. It's a challenge to the ruling classes to do something about it. Because this is not an animal. This is not some subhuman creature who, you know, doesn't understand how awful her life is. This woman knows well enough that what she has here is inadequate and shouldn't continue. Okay, I'm going to stop this recording now, and what I will then do is I will put onto Edmodo a question. And I'd like you to spend the second lesson. So the two recordings I've just done will take you for this lesson today. And I'd like you to spend tomorrow at the time that you would have normally taken tomorrow's lesson, so 50 minutes. I would say probably longer, because you should be, you know, link that into a homework to write a response to this opening chapter. And I'll put the question into Edmodo.